Welcome to Flashes of Insight. Let's talk about liturgy after COVID-19. My name's Joe Grayland and I'm talking with Tom O'Loughlin, Professor Emeritus of Historical Theology at the University of Nottingham in England. Tom, in your article, Caveat Pastor, one of the concerns you've raised is the consumption of liturgy as a product and how it has been highlighted through technology. Do you see this as an ongoing issue?
I think this has been an issue for a very long time for Western Christians. We think of getting things, we immediately ask the question, well, what does it give us? Underlying the idea that we can avoid liturgy and just go into the park, or I just want to do my own thing, is the idea that liturgy makes sense only insofar as I get something out of it. But actually we have to reverse that and think of liturgy as giving expression not only to who I am, but to who we are. And this is a question of chicken and egg. Is it a case that we have a poor sense of liturgy because we have a poor sense of church, or because we have a poor sense of church and it gives us a poor sense of liturgy? I think we have to try and appreciate the community dimension to liturgy, and that it's not what I get out of it, it's what I bring to liturgy. It's how I will celebrate. And that raises another question for people who lead liturgy or who are involved in preparing the liturgy. We have often colluded with that by thinking that we are producing a product. I remember being asked as a young priest, hey, will you supply mass for us? As which is exactly the same way as I might ask someone to come in and fix my computer. It's turned into a product.
So one of the things a question that has been raised, and one of the things that people are thinking about now, is that after Vatican II, with Sacrosanctum Concilium and the general instruction before the more recent translation, did we ever actually grasp the difference between the 1962 Missal, or the Tridentine Missal, and the 1969 or 1970 Missal? Have we actually grasped the difference that liturgy then was an act of observing Father Say Mass, whereas now it's supposed to be an act of the community with the presider praying the prayer together? Has that eluded us?
I'm actually old enough to remember the changes coming in, and the changes came in over a period of 3 or 4 years, and then there was the big shock of the major changes, the first Sunday of Advent, 69, and it was seen as just rubrical change. We used to do X, now we do Y. We used to use one language, we now use another. We used to use one book, we now use another. We used to use one style of vestments, now we use another. And it was seen very much almost as in the way you buy a new motor car, but you don't change the way you drive. And that has been a fundamental problem, that we looked on it as rubrics were always changing. An instruction would come from Rome, X is now to be done in a different way. And everyone got new instruction, and we concentrated on the new ways of doing. We didn't realize that they were only the surface changes of a very profound shift in the way we view Christian life as a way and a pilgrimage and a discipleship, and the way we view liturgy as a community expression, and the way we view the Eucharist as an action of the whole community with Christ to the Father, rather than someone doing the Eucharist on our behalf.
It's good. I've got a question here from Joe Ayres. Do you think people treat liturgy as a commodity because they are reduced to consumers and not essential participants?
Yes, I think that's very much the experience of going into a church on a Sunday morning. Is very often, you are coming in, thanks for coming, we're now going to give you this, and then go again. We do give people a sense. And I think there's a more profound problem going on here. For just over 500 years, since 1517, the Catholic Church has been saying to other groups around Martin Luther, then groups around Calvin, then other groups, we've been telling them how they're getting the Eucharist wrong. Most famously, we got to the position in the 1890s where we said that Anglicans were wasting their time. It was just a sham, a position that, a very eminent bishop, Cardinal Connell, repeated only less than 20 years ago, that an Anglican Eucharist is just a sham. It's just play acting. So we've been telling people all that's wrong with them. We've never been good at realizing maybe we're not doing it perfectly. And even when we wrote even when the new missal was promulgated in '69, it was promulgated almost saying, well, we know there was nothing wrong with the old missal, but there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfect, but this is sort of super perfect. We're not good at actually saying, hey, we've got a lot of big, deep problems in our understanding of the Eucharist. We got a lot of deep problems in our understanding of liturgy. And I think maybe it's time that instead of trying to pretend that we've nothing wrong, and yet we're still, why are we changing if we've got nothing wrong?
Yeah.
Well, we've got to now face the fact that maybe a lot of the things we're doing in liturgy aren't very good. And perhaps one of the reasons why people find liturgy so tiresome and so having so little value to them is actually a reminder that we're not doing it very well.
I'll break in there, Tom. And so Judith has been recently exploring online aids for preparing children and parents for baptism of infants. And she says, almost none of them include the Christian community welcomes you. That's the phrase. Do you think this lack could be the underlying reason for our consumer mentality and the lack of sense of presence of Christ in the gathered assembly?
I think we're living in an individualist society. We're living in a society, goodness knows, a world that considers Trump a serious contender for the most powerful office on earth, who believes that society is just a myth. It's just, it's just the group of people whom you go out there and calm. This is the larger world in which liturgy has to live in. And we have to be very much aware that as Christians, we have a very different view, not just of the church and liturgy to the consumer individualism around us, but we actually have a different view of humanity. Liturgy projects an image of our vision of humanity. And
I'm going to break in there, Tom, and just ask you, so how does the liturgy of the hours help us do this? This is a question from Charles. Is the liturgy of the hours a way to accept meaning and truth as a gift of God and a way of being immersed in the story of salvation history?
Okay, well, first of all, let's talk about when people say to me about the liturgy of the hours, I don't immediately say, well, here's a copy of the breviary, take it, or here's the 1-volume breviary, take it. I start with the very basics of the Christian liturgy of the hours, and you say, right, pious Jews always prayed at sunup, noon, and sundown. And the Christians took that over, and they put the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day, almost certainly at those 3 hours. So I say, start the liturgy of the hours with the Lord's Prayer in the beginning, Lord's Prayer at midday, Lord's Prayer in the evening. And then note that the Lord's Prayer is a plural prayer. It presupposes we're a virtual community. It doesn't use the word I once.
That's right, but that's a problem that we have in the liturgy with other things, for instance, the creed and the Confiteor, so that within our own liturgy, we don't consistently use the we. we actually dive off into the individual.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. That is an unfortunate blunder of the 2011 translation. The reality, the creed is a church creation, and therefore church authorities think they can change the first words of it. But Pater Haimon, thank heavens, we all the way back to the first century. We've been saying that goes back to the Lord Himself, and so we don't feel it's not my Father, and no. It's not forgive me my trespasses as I forgive. It's forgive us our trespasses. So immediately we start, if people can pray the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day, they're automatically thinking that they're praying as a group, and that's where you start. So the liturgy of the hours is, you start very simple.
Good. Tom, I want to move on now. We've got, Dave has asked about educating people after Vatican II, and we did that very well, but what do we do now? But I want to put that in the context of Elizabeth's question, which is, she's writing about the realities of COVID, and one of the crises that's been revealed is that a lot of people can't attend the Eucharist due to being sick or housebound, etc. And the visits of extraordinary ministers or ministers of communion to these people, which was an early church practice, was stopped and has been stopped for some time. So if we don't have that, what can we offer people now and into the future?
Well, I think it's the long-term future, it's too early to say. Let's hope we will find a vaccine. We will find ways of coming together again. We're already doing that. I'm here in Britain. We're being encouraged to go out on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays to go out and eat together in restaurants, because this is going to get the economy going together. So we will come back together again. And then we have to say, that's when we can celebrate the Eucharist in its fullness. That's when we can celebrate the meal of the Christians with the Christ together.
Okay, thank you.
In the meantime, we concentrate on all those things that we can do virtually. So I've heard some brilliant examples of people who have held a liturgy of the word together and have turned it into a service of thanksgiving around the liturgy of the word. And so we should be doing all these other things rather than saying only the best will do, and if we can't have that, we will have a surrogate.
So Joe is asking a question, is the solution perhaps the formation of small worship groups where they're committed to each other and pray together? And would that include, for instance, that they actually celebrate the Eucharist together?
The big church gatherings that we have today, often hundreds of people, are a function of the shortage of priests in the aftermath of the Tridentine reforms. We think of the shortage of priests as a late 20th and early 21st century phenomenon, but it actually goes back to the need to have a 6-year training program. But just imagine, I noticed as we were starting this conversation how many people had Irish surnames. And if you look at a map of Ireland and just pick up any one county and look at the number of places that have a place names beginning with kill this, Kilbride, kill Michael, kill something else. Or in Wales, Clan Sadwrn, Clan Bether, any of these show us that actually for a lot of Christian history, we were dealing with tiny communities. Indeed, the community that could walk to church in less than an hour. And so we're talking about circuits of a mile at most on an unpaved road. And so we're already in an artificial, we pick out how many priests we have, and then we build a number of parishes. Actually, we should be picking out real communities. Oh, here's a cluster. Here's another cluster. Here's another cluster. And thinking, how do we actualize the Eucharist within the clusters? We use a very top-down model of ministry. We should be using a bottom-up model of ministry.
One final question in this segment. Gavin's asked, with all the changes to liturgy and worship, are there any absolutes that form the bedrock of our worship that we should be building on? Just a quick comment on that, Tom.
The sacrifice of the Christians always takes place around one table. It uses one loaf. It uses one cup. It is one prayer to the Father in Christ. Everything else is up for grabs.
This is Flashes of Insight, and we've been talking about liturgy after COVID-19.